Hey, everybody. Welcome to Whispers of the Middle East. This is a presentation brought to us by Sandy Crowell. She's a longtime resident of Unity of Olympia and an author and a traveler. And so she has agreed to show pictures and talk a little bit about her travels in the Middle East. Sandy, take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for Reverend Terry for setting up this opportunity for me to speak and share some of the exciting things that happened along really the path of much biblical history. I first presented this on Palm Sunday, so I have a couple of things that are related to the Palm Sunday talk here. Really, Palm Sunday represented a lot of hope. It's a little bit joyful after being somber for so long during Lent, but actually it's a little bit joyful after being somber for so long during COVID. So to get started, Whispers of the Middle East. My travel partner, Bill Lindstrom, and I traveled to Israel and Jordan and Egypt right shortly before COVID struck. We returned right before Christmas in 2019. And that experience, it seems a long ways ago, but truly history never really stops. I'd just like to say, for one thing, this is not just a biblical experience, it's also really primarily an archaeological experience. And by way of a disclaimer, I'm neither a biblical scholar, nor am I an archaeologist. You can just call me a curious tourist with a lot of questions to ask and a big interest in historical and archaeological information. I'm very impressed with digs. So to get started here, I'd like to share a map of Israel, because we hear about Israel in the news, but do we really know much about it? I certainly didn't. I didn't realize how small it is. It's about the size of New Jersey. And if we were to drive across Israel, it would take, it's maybe not very long, it's about 90 miles. If we were to go from the top of Israel to the bottom of it, as it shows on the map, it would take maybe about 9 hours. So if you think of going from Olympia to, say, the Montana border or Idaho border, that would be just about how wide Israel is how long it is as its longest. Israel is if you think about it being the size compared to the size of Washington, it's 8 times smaller than the state of Washington. Israel is also very high tech. Remember that Israel is really a young country. It was just started in 1948. And so it's developed into this really very advanced country. It's 10th in the world in technology compared to the US, which is 4th. So we were told right away that a lot of pride in its technology. So in addition to the trip to Israel, I recently had a trip to Washington, D.C. to see my family and to the History of the Bible Museum, which I'll talk about briefly. But I did want to show you, if you see this green part of the slide, the green part belongs to the Palestinians. And they're right smack dab in the middle of Israel. But that also means that there is pretty much a wall around them. And crossing into Palestine was much like crossing from San Diego, say, into Tijuana. you cross into a highly guarded border, and the inside of that is very oppressed. It's people, very high rate of unemployment. People are unhappy. It's not well kept. If you look at the center here around Jerusalem, you'll see many little triangular dots, and those represent new developments, new colonization by the Israelis on Palestinian ground. So, history of the Bible. One of the things that struck me in kind of filling in the gaps here as I toured the Museum of the Bible is all the layers and layers of history. The Bible, we tend to think of maybe the Bible as the New Testament, but the stories in the Bible go back centuries and centuries. And really, there is a whole lot of archaeology that has gone on in discovering the history of the Bible, but also in discovering many of the stories that are related in the Bible and their foundation on the ground. The layers of history include the ancient times. That goes back, the part that goes back truly thousands of years, and that's a part of the history of the Jewish people. The Old Testament, the Israelis, the Arabs, and the prophets. All of the Muslims and Jewish people all see Jesus and others as prophets rather than how they are viewed in Christianity. When we see the Roman and Greek occupation, think of that as 7 centuries. So compared to the history of the US, that's kind of a drop in the bucket. Well, Christianity is over 2,000 years old, as obviously we know that. Then Islam came along in 610 AD. The Crusades lasted for a couple hundred years. The Ottoman Empire lasted a long time, and that was part of the territory of Israel. The Baha'i religion was founded in 1844. The Palestinians lived in the area from the 5th century AD to the present. And then the Jewish state, 1948. When we landed, the first thing we were told is Israel has a high state of security. People are drafted, girls included, at age 18. And so we saw a whole lot of young teenage soldiers. It's a common joke. Do you know what you call an Israeli soldier? And the answer is a teenager. And we saw that playful horseplay in the airports and just young girls armed with big rifles. But the security was really tight. Every street corner on Tel Aviv had high security. So we were reassured of that. Another question that we were asked immediately was, are you Christian? Well, of course we're Christian. We believe in Jesus Christ, and we as opposed to being Muslim or Jew, of course we're Christians. This is the city of Tel Aviv. If you'll notice the high skyscrapers in the background, high skyscrapers in the background, that represents the modern technology of Tel Aviv and Israel. But in the foreground, you'll see the ancient city of Jaffa. And this dates back again, hundreds, thousands of years in the old stone buildings and the history of that city. I was really interested in this sculpture. It shows a people with no roots. And it's symbolic of the Israelis who have been vanquished, conquered, adrift for thousands of years without a true home. And to me, that was symbolic. So our first journey into Israel beyond Tel Aviv was into Nazareth. Nazareth today is considered the Arab capital of Israel. It's 69% Muslim. And traditionally, of course, it was considered to be where Jesus was from. As the people went to, as Jesus went to Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, the buzz was, who is it? Who's coming? And the word was always the Jesus of Nazareth. So that was considered the home of Jesus. Our first stop was at the cradle of Christianity. This was thought to be where the angel Gabriel spoke to the Virgin Mary. As I'm talking about these sites, remember that these are places that are thought to be, that archaeologists believe possibly were the original sites. It doesn't mean it's absolutely definitive, because it's all still open to interpretation. I found this particular site very touching. When you think about a 14-year-old virgin who is approached by an angel and a visionary of God saying, well, you're going to give birth to the Son of God. Well, that whether you believe the literal translation of that or not, it's really a pretty powerful message. And it's so simple. The message is very simplistic. I really enjoyed seeing what is thought to be Joseph's workshop. We traditionally think of Joseph as a carpenter, when archaeologists believe that Joseph may very well have been more of a stonemason. And just imagining a young boy named Jesus the Christ running around in this site was pretty, well, it was quite an experience to see that. And to see how the archaeologists are really indeed studying those areas. In Bethlehem, this was the cave of Jesus's birth. When, again, we have this image of a stable, of the manger. Well, it was a stable and there probably was a manger, but it was in a cave because that's where many animals were kept. So this particular site in Bethlehem has a complicated ownership. It's owned by 3 churches: the Greek Orthodox, the Armenian Apostolic, and the Roman Catholics. And you can just imagine coming to any kind of decision about renovations or repairs or anything. At one site in Jerusalem, there is a ladder that has been there for several centuries because none of the owners can agree what to do with it. And certainly that explains all the things that are all the tug and pull that goes on with a religious site. Again, the message of these places, of the Church of the Nativity, is humble. And you have to enter by a door that's about 3 feet high, so that everyone who enters experiences humility. The message was also very simple in the altar, and touching in that regard too, that really this was a very humble sort of story. This wasn't about riches, it wasn't about prosperity, it was about humility. We've journeyed to Capernaum, where Jesus lived as an adult, preaching and thought to perform miracles and speaking in parables. This is a quote from the Bible. After some days, he again entered Capernaum, and the word spread he was home. And so many gathered there that there was no more room, and he began to speak the word to them. It was also considered to be the home of Simon, Peter Simon, referred to in the Bible, and in the background is a Catholic church. Really, again, an archaeological dig. This is so much about archaeology, and the foundation of their in the foundation of the home was found a Roman mosaic on the floor. So that again shows those layers of history. We went to the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus recruited disciples. I will make you fishers of men, he said. And it was also where he, the story is that he walked on water. It was just to know all the history of that, all the people who walked on those shores throughout the centuries, was pretty overpowering. The River Jordan, another misnomer. You may have heard the River Jordan is deep and wide, milk and honey on the other side. That reference was to the Jews fleeing Egypt and looking for the land of milk and honey. But the River Jordan is not very big at all. I would compare it to, if you compare it to parts of the Chehalis, it's the Chehalis River or the Nisqually River, it's very small and very placid. This is where John the Baptist was thought to have baptized Jesus. And the quote from the Bible is, "In those days, Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And when he came up out of the water, immediately he saw the heavens opened and the Spirit descending upon him like a dove. And a voice came from heaven, 'Thou art my beloved Son, and with thee I am well pleased.'" So another major piece of biblical history. When we went to Jericho, which is considered to be the oldest city on earth, occupied city on earth for 10,000 years, we did cross into Palestinian land, and we had to change vans because Israelis are not allowed to, are insured for driving in Palestinian lands. And it was there that we saw a very well-versed young man who told us stories of the Bible. He was very, very fluent in English, spoke very well. Someone asked him about the move of the capital to Jerusalem and how he felt about that. And he instantly, you could just see the anger and the oppression. And for some reason, he truly glared at us as Americans like it was our fault. But it was a very, again, a meaningful moment of where politics and history and religion and well, maybe even a form of oppression occur. And just to see that in live, well, see that in his look at us was a moment. So the wall of Jericho, the legend is, and Joshua bid the battle of Jericho and the walls came tumbling down, if you remember that song. That has not been proven. The walls did come tumbling down, it was because of an earthquake, but it has taken on legendary proportions. So many of the places that are verified, that particular one is still pretty much up in the air. This spring does date back to references in the Old Testament of Elisha. The Dead Sea is a shrinking lake, and you've probably heard references to the Dead Sea as being very, very salty, where you can absolutely float on it, and that's certainly true. If you'll notice in the front, those are salt crystals. My partner was walking in that water and slipped and cut his hand on one of those salt crystals and still bears the scars to this day of that severe cut. So that was kind of a downer in our particular journey. The Dead Sea, though, is shrinking and is really an environmental hazard. Today, in the last 20 years, the Dead Sea has been reduced in size by 30%. So there is a plan afoot. It's called the Red Sea Dead Sea Project, or the Two Seas Canal, that will bring water in from the Red Sea to beef that up, to restore it, but also to provide drinking water for Israel and Jordan. It will, and one of the reasons is that it's been depleted is that for crops and dams, just like some of the issues here in the Northwest with dams. But it's going to be quite an interesting project, and you can find more about that if you look up Red Sea, Dead Sea, and Google that information. It's quite an interesting modern phenomena. One of the things about the Dead Sea is that people use the mud from the Dead Sea for cosmetic purposes, and we did see people covered in the Dead Sea mud, and supposedly rejuvenating to your skin. Remember that part of the occupation, the Roman occupation that went on for 700 years. This was the home of Pontius Pilate on the banks of the Mediterranean. This is Caesarea. It was really remarkably restored. There were many ruins there to look at, an amphitheater, and just really quite a history. And of course, we all know, of course, that Pontius Pilate was the one who somewhat reluctantly ordered the crucifixion of Christ, and later went back to Rome in shame and eventually commit suicide. This was the time of the rule of King Herod, and King Herod was pretty paranoid guy. He ordered the death of all Jewish baby boys, which was why the people fled. Excuse me, phone ringing. This is why Jesus and Mary and Joseph fled to Egypt when Jesus was just a little boy. Now Masada is, imagine this, it's 1,800 feet straight up, and we went by tram. Herod built his escape up on the top of this, and it was really quite well developed. He had developed a cistern system for water. There were baths, there were villas. It was quite impressive. Well, eventually, the Jews fled to the top of Masada to escape the Romans. There were 900 of them, and you can see where the Romans built these planks to really get up there and enslave them. They were planning to make all of the Jews slaves. Instead, the Jews, most of them commit suicide. I think there may have been 5 survivors, but oddly enough, there have never been any remains found of those 900 Jews. So it's quite an interesting story. I love the novel by Alice Hoffman, The Dove Keepers, and plan to pursue a TV or a movie rendition of that. So fascinating place. It wasn't just the city of Jews, the country of Jews and Muslims. It was also the site of the Baha'i Gardens. And this was the 4th century fourth religion in the Middle East, founded in 1844, and this was a beautiful site in the city of Haifa. Obviously, many mosques and Muslims in the Jewish within Israel, and the mosques at 5 o'clock. There's a call to prayer in the Mideast, and it's so eerie to those of us who are not from there. This kind of mournful song in Arabic that comes out and loudspeakers throughout the land where Muslims are living. The population of Muslims in Israel is about 17%. The population of Arabs, however, in Israel is about 21%. And Baha'i is practically negligible. There are about 2% Christians in Israel. I thought, oh, great, when I knew when we were going, what a wonderful time to be going to Israel because it's Christmas time. Well, guess what? They took us by bus to see the Christmas tree. This is not a place where one observes Christmas. And then on to Jerusalem. As a mother comforts her child, so I will comfort you. In Jerusalem, you shall find comfort. And this is from Isaiah 66:13. So on to Jerusalem. This was is a shrine to Abraham, the father of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So the roots of all three of those religions, and possibly even four, is based on the story of Abraham, who was called upon by God to sacrifice his son Isaac, and he at the last minute, God did not require him to do that, but this was the shrine, supposedly the site where that occurred. And as I'm saying that, I'm thinking, wow, that's to have identified this particular site that's the father of all of those religions is a pretty amazing thing that has been preserved and cherished. This is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is the site of the crucifixion of Jesus. This picture on the right shows that in the background, but you'll see where there are Arab and mostly Arab and Muslim merchants in the alleyways of Jerusalem and this particular site. What this had was we followed the Via Dolorosa, which is the Stations of the Cross, and that stands for the path of pain. It identifies all of the stations where Jesus carried the cross to the crucifixion. And here, the next thing, this particular site, we were standing there when a group of American Catholics came through, and led by, I think you can see a nun there in the background. When they paused at this site, they all began saying the Lord's Prayer. And we joined in and got tears, very teary, because of the unity of that particular and the symbolism of our joint faith and religion. And that it would be in that site was pretty incredible. This is thought to be the stone where Jesus may have lain. And I did touch that but I read later where that probably is not the actual stone. Nevertheless, you can see people very reverently touching the stone. And the Wailing Wall. Herod built up a beautiful, fantastic temple that was later completely destroyed except for this wall. And this is where people come. This is where the men come. I went to the site where the women come, but it wasn't nearly as photogenic, where people come to pray. And up in the upper right-hand corner, in the upper right-hand corner, you can see a crevice where people write notes with their prayers on it, and have for maybe hundreds of years. A very, very religious and special site. We ended our tour in Jerusalem by going to the Holocaust Museum in memory of the deaths of 6,000 Jews. This has pictures of many of them and names of those who were perished in the Holocaust. It's not, for me personally, I have such an emotional reaction to that story that I selfishly have tried to avoid it, but you can't go to Israel without understanding that and seeing that particular thing. Well, as Reverend Terry once said, all faith traditions provide a path to God, which is certainly true. You know, when we think about the humility and the simplicity that I showed earlier, it's taken generations of human beings to scramble that and make it the subject of wars and the subject of many deaths. And it's after that, it just became it was no longer simple or humble. And it would be nice if we could return to that particular message. And the message that's in the Bible: peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give you. Let not your hearts be troubled, nor let them be afraid. And it is that message. This particular message came from the New Testament. But looking at the past of the Bible, of the Quran, of the Torah, that is truly a message that, if it doesn't transcend faiths, it certainly should. And with that, just remember that the whispers of the Middle East are underlying our culture, underlying our belief systems throughout the world, and they are always with us. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you would like to email me or contact me with questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Hey, thank you so much for sharing that, Sandy. That was just lovely. And for those of you who are viewing, if you got to this point, that I'm going to take it that meant that you really enjoyed this slideshow. Certainly, Unity of Olympia would be thrilled to receive your appreciation as a donation. You can certainly give a cash donation. In the notes, if you do that online, then unityofolympia.org donate button. If you do that, put a note in there that says for Sandy Crowell's class. That would be really lovely. And watch for the April 25th class, Where Cultures Meet, where Sandy's going to be talking about Egypt, right?
Yes, and the grandeur of Egypt. Yes, for
Well, I'm
sure.
looking forward to it. This has just been lovely. And thank you for joining us.